Welcome all. Mr. Cull's class, we're delighted you can be with us. This young lady to my right is Donna Migliaccio, who is a very talented and largely celebrated writer of fantasy for both young adult and adult readers. And she has published a series of 4 books, the Gemetta Stone series, and I'll let her tell you all about them. But it's a pretty cool thing that she could be here with us today. I think we're very, very lucky. So without further ado, welcome.
I feel sorry for everybody who has to stand. I'll try not to be boring, okay? I started writing the series. It came out of a germ of a writing assignment when I was in high school. So that's how long ago I thought about writing this story. It's, as Mr. Follett said, it's up to 4 books now. The first book came out last August. The 4th book came out 2 weeks ago. So there's still 1 more left, and maybe even a prequel. But anyway, that's what I've spent not all that time. I mean, I started, if I'd been writing this since I was in high school, that would have been, that's just, no, nobody needs to do that. But it was a germ of a writing assignment in my advanced composition class, my senior year. And what we were told to do was write the beginning of a story, beginning of a novel. And I had a dream, which sounds really weird. I had a dream the night before of this young man meeting this young woman on a road with a horse. And so that's what I wrote, was this little scene where this young man met this young woman on a road with a horse. And that was the germ of the story. And the thing that I got out of the dream was the main character's name, Tristan Gemetta. I woke up knowing that name. I don't know why, but that's the one thing that has stayed constant throughout the evolution of the series, is that name has stayed the same. And I've had editors and readers who said, why did you name him a girl's name? I don't think of Tristan as a girl's name. It's Kirsten maybe, but it's what it was. So I stuck to that gun. So you're nodding like you know that Tristan could be a boy's name.
Oh, my name's Kristen. So.
Kristen with an I on, right? Yeah. So it's close, but I liked it because I didn't want anything that sounded too macho. I didn't want to name him Spike or Butch or anything like that. So, so anyway, that's how it started. And I wrote the vast majority of the book, the first version of the book, when I got out of college. I was working a day job and I was going home at night, and I felt like that was my whole life. I was go to my day job, come home at night. I didn't feel like I had any other aspects to my life. So I started writing because it was fun. I enjoyed it. And I wrote, this is back when dinosaurs roamed the earth and there was no internet and there was no personal computer. I wrote it on a typewriter with whiteout to correct my errors. And when I finally finished writing the first clean version of what became the first book, it was approximately 160,000 words, which is roughly a 400-page book, which is way too long for a debut novel. Most places want you to have a debut novel that's less than 100,000 words. With fantasy, you get a little more room because you have to world build, so they'll let you go up to maybe 110, 120,000 words. But it was still too long. I didn't know, because there was no internet. So what I did when I was done with the book, I thought, well, let me see if I can find a publisher. So I went to my local library, because no internet, and found a book called Publishers Marketplace, which was just that. It's just a listing of all the publishers for all the various kinds of books or magazines or whatever. And I went through it until I found the fantasy publishers. And I chose Daw Books, which still exists, and at that time had an imprint, which is a subdivision of it, called Ballantine, and that was their science fiction and fantasy line. So I fired off a letter to their editor and sent this gigantic box with my paper manuscript, double-spaced, one-sided, 400 pages, off to them. And then I waited. And then I waited. And after 3 months, I wrote them and said, you still have my book? And they said, yes, we're looking at it. And it was just a form, yes, we've got it. When you submitted back in the day, these submissions were called over the transom submissions. Back in the day, doorways used to have a little window on top to let air go through, because it's before air conditioning as well. So these were basically books that kind of didn't get brought in by an agent. They were kind of fired into the room. And they ended up on what was called the slush pile, which was just as gross as it sounds. It's just where all the junk ended up. And they would have junior editors and interns and whatnot that would read the slush and then move it on up if it was liked. And if it wasn't liked, then you got a polite form rejection letter. So 3 months went by with no rejection letter, no nothing. So I thought, all right. I nudged. They said, we're still working on it. 3 more months went by. I did the same thing. 9 months went by. The manuscript came back. And with it came a personalized rejection slip, which basically said, we like this book, but it's way too long. And for fantasy, it doesn't have enough magic in it. Can you make those changes and send it back to us? Well, I was dumb and I didn't know, because no internet, that this is what's called revise and resubmit, which means that you're on the right road to getting published. So I thought, well, sure, I can do that. And I looked at it and thought, I just don't know if I can get out as many words as they want me to. They really wanted it to be, a lot shorter. So I carved out some words and I said, let me just throw in some magic spells here and there. And I sent it back. And it came back within weeks with a not so polite rejection letter which said, you didn't do what I asked you to do. Good luck landing this someplace else. So I was a little beat down by it. It was like, oh, I did all this work. I'd sent it to one publisher and I gave up. I put it aside. Real life was interfering in a big way. I was, moving ahead with the career that I was in at the time. I had a journalism degree and was pursuing that end of the business. And it just got backburnered. It got backburnered for probably a decade. And then I got it out again and I read it and I went, a lot of this is not written very well. I think I can write it better. And there's still the germ of a good story here, although a lot of it's not very good. So let me try it again. So I'd fiddle with it, off and on for a decade or two. I'd fiddle with it. But I never again got to the point of being a publishable book. I just had pieces of it. And I knew what I wanted to do with it, but my skill level wasn't up to my taste level yet. I knew where I wanted it to be, but I couldn't get it there yet. And it took more decades. And it was not until I was in New York in 2009, I was working on the revival of Ragtime on Broadway. And again, my life had come down to go to the theater, come home, go to the theater, come home. It wasn't glamour. I was living in a sublet. I didn't really have any friends in New York. My family was all elsewhere. So I was alone a lot. So I thought, let me get the book out again. Let me start again. And this time, let me see if I can begin at the beginning and work my way through it and make this what it needs to be. So I started work. And I think it probably took me 2 years to finish the first draft because life was interfering. Got that done. Went to a workshop, a week-long writer's workshop. Didn't get much out of the workshop except that I realized I needed to start over again, that it wasn't starting with a big enough bang. The book was really telly. And so I started working. That's what writing is. It's not so much the writing, it's the revising and the revising and the revising and the editing. So I finally got it up to where I thought it should be. As it happened at the time, I started looking for a literary agent. My talent agency, which handles my acting work, opened a literary wing, so I didn't have to look very far. So I got an agent, and she shopped the book around. She went through all the major imprints. There really are 5 big publishers, and then there's a bunch of small niche publishers like Tor and Banned Books and things like that specialize in fantasy. And then there's small publishing, and then there's self-publishing and vanity publishing. I didn't want to go that far down, but my agent landed me with Fiery Seas, which is a small publisher based out of Alabama, and the first book came out in August of last year. So that's how long it took me to get a book published. A lot of stuff intervened in the interim. I had a 30-plus year acting career. I got married. I don't have children, but stuff happens. but it takes a while hopefully for you that plan to do this, it won't take you as long as it took me. But for me, that's how long my journey was. So, any questions? It's a lot, I know. Don't let it scare you. Some of you I know got the excerpts to read. Did you have anything to?
By the way, if you didn't get excerpts to read and you'd like them, I have some here. So just say the word and I'll pass them around. Anybody?
How many of you would like to be writers? Okay, not too many, or not saying. How many of you read on a regular basis for fun? Not just schoolwork, but how many? So why is it that you don't like to read? Yep, I'm pointing at you.
No, I like to read.
You do?
Yeah.
Okay, what do you like to read?
Depends. I read a lot of stuff because I'm not usually into choosing new books.
Into what?
Choosing new books.
Cheesy new books? Choosing new
Yeah.
books. Why is that?
If I like a book, then I don't know. I don't like branching out. I like what I have.
Okay, and what do you like to read?
Tough. Fantasy and science fiction, I guess.
Okay, nothing wrong with that. So you're a genre reader, and you specialize in your genre. So, how about any other readers? Want to tell me what you like to read?
Action.
Action? What's an action book for you?
Let's see.
I know, I put you on the spot.
Just, I mean,
You like thrillers or adventure stories or
kind of like adventure, like, I don't know. I just read books, honestly. But, yeah, like Hunger Games on the
Okay.
Divergent series, kind of like this dystopian stuff.
okay.
There's Hunger Games Divergent. I like the book, the River.
Okay, good. Yeah, I mean, Hunger Games is huge, and the Divergent series is huge. So, so it's you also are reading sort of dystopian sci-fi type stuff. I find this really interesting because I find that a lot of people your age read a great deal of what I would term fantasy or speculative fiction. I like it too. I don't read a whole lot of what I would call traditional fantasy, although what I wrote is more in that line. I like more speculative. I like urban fantasy. Any of you read Neil Gaiman? He wrote Coraline, and terrific writer. But he writes a lot of urban fantasy. Ocean at the End of the Lane. I was lucky enough to hear him speak. He was being honored with an award. George Mason University, closer to DC, every year does this fall festival called Fall for the Book, and he won one of their awards. And I wanted to hear him speak anyway, but I'd gone to a panel discussion right before it, and they were giving away tickets for it. There were front row seats. And he took questions about the Doctor Who series, because he's written for the Doctor Who series, and he took questions about his writing. And then he read from The Ocean at the End of the Lane, which had not come out then. It was very exciting to hear it. And he's got one of those lovely, deep British voices that you can kind of roll around in. It was very exciting. So, anybody else? Anybody read romance? Yeah, that's a huge, huge, big selling genre. There are people, I mean, I don't particularly care for romance myself, but there are people who do and read it. They go through books like cotton candy. E-books are made for romance readers. So that's another huge area where people are, oh, you should write romance because it sells. And it's true, but it's not what I do. Anybody else?
I think my students have a lot of questions.
One of the biggest authors in that genre was J.K. Rowling.
Yes.
How do you compare yourself to her?
I enjoyed the Harry Potter series when they came out. I didn't like her mysteries so much, more recent stuff that she's put out. And it wasn't even the writing of the stories. I think she's a workman-like writer. I don't think she's a brilliant writer, but man, she spins a good yarn. Her world building was beautiful and all that, but it's funny because I think they did such a great job with the movies that I would not go back and reread Harry Potter now. If I wanted to revisit that story, I would go and watch a movie again. So I took my almost entire hardback Harry Potter series, almost in pristine condition because I'd read them one time, and gave them to my local little free library. So, and they were gone within hours. Somebody wanted them. But I enjoyed the Rowling books. Would I reread them? I got what I needed out of them. There are certain books that I reread, not many, and I'll get like a paper copy or a hardback copy just to have it because it's that good that I'll go back and read it again. Yes?
So since you mentioned you also did acting, how do you think acting and writing, like being an actor and being a writer, are like similar?
How does acting inform writing and writing inform acting? It's all about creating character. When you act, you have a character that's been created for you. A writer has written that character, a director is helping you mold that character, and then you take what's in you to flesh it all out. With writing, you're starting from the very bottom. You're building that whole character. You're building the way they look. You're building the way they function. You're building the way they react to the world around them. So it's the same but different. But certainly, I feel like I live in the world of dialogue when I'm acting. You know, I'm saying the lines. And if a show is well written, lines flow, they roll, they have a certain rhythm and a certain music. A badly written show doesn't have that same music. And I've been fortunate enough to work on a lot of world premieres. So you can go to a writer and say, this is not working for me. Is there a way that we can streamline this? And occasionally I've been rude enough to go, grammatically this doesn't make sense. And nobody likes to hear that. Nobody likes a smart ass. But yeah, it's, so I feel like one of my strengths as a writer is dialogue. That I have an ear for it. So that's helpful to me. And the creation of a character, what motivates a character, has been helpful as well. And on both sides. Mm-hmm. Yes?
What's your personal writing process?
My personal writing process, right now, is a little raggedy-assed. It's, I'm not real regular with my hours, and when I'm working on a show, I really don't have a whole lot of time. And I find that I'm actually more productive when I don't have as much time, because the time to write is precious to me, so I don't waste it. Right now, I'm between shows, between gigs, which is actor speak for unemployed. So I have way too much time, and I'm not writing right now, because I can do that in an hour, I can do that in a day, I can do that next week. It's easy to put off. I do other kinds of writing. Sometimes I'll write blogs or I'll write short stories and stuff. But the fifth book is sitting there going, are you ready? Come on, let's do this. So my process usually is to sit down, and what it boils down to is what's called BIC, butt in chair. Sit down and start writing. That's the only way you can write. It doesn't matter where you write. You can take your laptop to the coffee shop, or you can sit out in the woods somewhere and write on a piece of paper, but you have to sit down and write, or else it doesn't get done. You can imagine all you want, but that's not writing. Yes?
I had a question we talked about in an earlier class. Predominantly when, obviously you have to have your butt in the chair in the writing process, and we talk a lot about pre-writing, and you emphasize revision.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if you would comment on revision and how much of the business of writing goes into revision, and that story you shared about the shredding of something.
Oh.
Yeah, and just to emphasize to my students that I emphasize you're not going to get it right the first time.
No, you won't.
Yeah.
There's a great, if you want to find it on YouTube, a great little segment of an Ira Glass speech that he gave, I think it was a commencement address, where he talks about when you first start to write, that you know what you want to write, and your taste is really good, but your skill level isn't there yet. And you have to give yourself time to learn your craft. And the only way you can learn your craft is by doing. You can go to class after class, but unless you're going to sit down and write, you're not going to learn how to be a writer. You can read books on how to write, but unless you sit down and actively put words on paper on the computer screen, you're not going to learn how to write. So it takes a while for your skill level to get up to your taste level, to where you're going to be able to produce something that makes you happy inside, that makes you feel like this is as well as I can do. The shredding story that you're talking about is that massive manuscript that I sent out years and years and years ago, I kept for a long, long time. And it was only last year that it surfaced when I was cleaning out something, this huge box of paper.
Essentially a rough draft, right?
Yeah, well, it wasn't, that one wasn't a rough,
Yeah,
that was a finished draft. It just was
Of
the
a
one that
book.
got rejected. Yeah, and I've since moved way on from that. And I thought, why am I keeping this? What good is this doing to me? I've moved past it. Other than a curiosity, it's of no use to me. I've moved on. So I shredded it. And my husband walked in as I was shredding it. He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm shredding this first manuscript." He goes, Why would you do that?" And I said, "Because it's done. It's over with. The book is right here. This is the book." So, I don't, how many of you read To Kill a Mockingbird? Yeah. How many of you are aware of a book that was released just a couple years ago by Harper Lee called Go Set a Watchman? Okay, so you know that that was an earlier draft of To Kill a Mockingbird. So what happened was Harper Lee was not in her right mind in the last years of her life. She was in some form of dementia, which wasn't common knowledge, but someone got hold of that manuscript and said, "Ooh, I could probably make some money off this manuscript." And she said, "Okay." And what it was an original version of the story, which she had written from the point of view of a much older scout, a woman who'd gone to New York and was trying to be in the business and all that. And it is not as effective, I don't think. What did you think? Did you enjoy it?
I don't know. I have mixed feelings about it.
I had very mixed feelings about it. It was interesting to see how Harper Lee developed as a writer, looking at that and looking at To Kill a Mockingbird. But at the same time, Atticus Finch is a bit of a racist in this earlier book. And I knew what she was trying to say. She wasn't trying to paint him as a racist, but he came across that way. And I thought, ooh, I wish I'd never read this book, because it kind of tainted To Kill a Mockingbird for me, which I think is a brilliant piece. So that's one of the reasons why I shredded my other manuscript. I didn't like anybody's going to go look at my stuff later on, but I don't want that there. This is what exists now. So there's no interest except from a curiosity level. That's why it was shredded. Yes?
So when you set out your 4 books, how did you keep that idea fresh and overcome your writer's block? How did you manage to keep that alive?
Well, it ebbed and flowed. I mean, once I really got going with it, I was pretty much consistently writing the series all the time, even while the first book was out being shopped around. I kept on writing because I knew where I was headed with it. There's still one more book in the series and a possible prequel. The prequel is written. I need to go back and mess with it again, but I've always known that it was a really big, long story. So it was going to take me a while to write it. So it pretty much is a constant, that there's always something in the works. I'll stop occasionally and write a short story or blog, or right now kind of go wait for ideas to percolate to the surface. One of the things that is holding me up on the 5th book is that 2 of the major characters that are introduced in the 5th book, from the way that I originally conceived them, I've rethought them. I thought it would be much more interesting to have one of the characters be on the autism spectrum, even though they don't know what that is. This isn't something that they recognize as a thing, but I thought, how interesting would it be to explore a character who processes information differently, and how does this make them different from everybody else that's around them, and how does that make people perceive them? So I thought it would be interesting to do that. And the other character is just going to be a lot meaner than he originally was.
Has this extended storyline ever started to tell itself in a different direction than you imagined for it?
All the time, all the time. I have the spine of the story. I've always known that it was going to start here and end here. But how it's grown out, how it's fleshed itself from that spine, has not always been something that I felt like I was in control of. If you write a character that's a strong character, that character is going to inform you about how they're going to react to stimulus or to a problem. And sometimes you owe it to yourself to listen to them, to go down that side path rather than staying right along the spine. And that's helped for me. I think it makes a more interesting story. if it takes you in unexpected places. And that's one of the nicest things that people have ever said to me about my writing, is it surprised me that things happen that they weren't expecting to happen. And that's good, because you're not being predictable that way. Yes?
How has your writing process and style changed since high school until after you published your first book?
Oh, well, beyond the actual physical thing of going from a typewriter and whiteout to being able to use a personal computer or a tablet or something like that, or even write on your phone, I think I am just as focused as I was when I was in high school. I think because of the experience of the world, I'm 62 years old, so, you know, there's been a lot of life lived in those 62 years. I have more of experience with the way the world can be. Everything is not as black and white as it felt when I was in high school. So there's lots and lots of shades of gray. So that's affected the way that I write. In the process, it might be that I've gotten lazier. I don't know. I don't sit down the way I used to sit down in front of that typewriter and just clack on those keys for hours and hours. Now I sit down in front of the computer and I'll go, let me go on Twitter. So, and that's the bad thing about having the internet right there. It's a huge, huge time suck. And I would say right now my biggest time suck is Candy Crush Saga.
As you have grown in experience, does what comes out of you the first time more closely resemble a finished draft? Are
Yes.
you saving some time?
Yeah, because I've had practice. I've had years and years of practice, so I know if I start a sentence a certain way that's going to be a good way to start a sentence. I've learned to avoid the whole explaining part. You know, people tell you, don't tell show. What they're saying is, don't explain to me everything. Just put it out there. A lot of early writers that are still new at the business have trouble trusting their reader, trusting that your reader's gonna get it. So you tend to over-explain things to them. And you have to trust that they're gonna get it. If you confuse too many people, yeah, then you've got a problem. But it was interesting to me, the previous class that I spoke to, someone said in the excerpt that they were not certain at first. There's a character named Malvo who shows up. And they initially, because I didn't identify him as a horse, they thought he was a person. And that was the way I wanted it to be. I wanted, because this horse, even though he's just a horse, is a character in the whole story. So I wanted him to be introduced as a personality and not just a horse, if that makes sense. Yes?
Do you have like a set schedule for writing, or do you only write when you're
I
inspired?
wish I did. I wish I did. I wish I had the self-control and the schedule where I could say, I'm going to get up at 5 a.m. and write until 7 a.m. And I know people that do that, and I envy them so much, because my schedule, particularly if I'm working on a show, is so screwy. I go from rehearsing 8 hours a day to going through the tech period, which in professional theater you have what are called 10 out of 12s, which are days when you work a 12-hour day. And you get a 2-hour break somewhere in there. But so you're working for 12 hours and you're exhausted all the time. On Broadway, 10 out of 12s can run for 2 weeks. So 2 weeks of nothing but being at the show, being at the show, being at the show. And if you've got time, if I have time down from that, like if I've got 20 minutes where I'm not on stage, I'll get out my tablet and start working. But the last show I did, I was understudying, so I never got a break. I was always taking notes at somebody's staging or someone's, changing lines or something like that. So I wish I had a more even schedule, because it's too easy for me to make excuses for myself. I wish I was more disciplined about it right now. Anybody? Yes.
Would you consider your book a cliche fantasy?
Sorry again?
Would you consider your book like a cliche fantasy?
A cliche fantasy. There are certain tropes in fantasy, which are things there in any genre. There are tropes. If you guys have ever looked at the website TV Tropes? It's hysterical. You should check it out. It's about things that happen that are standard in any plot, whether it's a movie, TV show, book, that kind of thing. There are cliches in my series. It is in the trope of the medieval setting, which is sort of Game of Thrones, Lord of the Rings kind of thing, a medieval European setting. So there is that. As the series goes on, that world expands a little bit more. So I like to think I sort of subverted the trope. I introduced the trope but then subverted. So you also have the misplaced heir, which that's what the beginning of my story is about, is that my main character loses his throne and is thrown out. So, but I miss the cliche of the farm boy who discovers he's a king and that kind of stuff. It's good to know your tropes because that helps set your reader in the world that they're accustomed to. Like if you read a lot of fantasy or dystopian stuff, you expect certain things to happen that establish it in that genre. But then the fun part is to try to play games with those tropes and like throw them a curveball. You think this is a missing heir, but it's not. So yes and no is the short answer. Yes?
Is there any other genre you consider writing?
Yes. If I ever get finished with this, which sometimes seems like I'll be an old lady on a walker before that happens, I have an idea for a romantic comedy that's about theater people who go to do one of those big outdoor religious dramas that they do someplace like Kentucky and Tennessee.
Come on in. It's all right.
Can I pass something?
Sure. Thank you so much.
So I'd like to try my hand at that. And I do literary fiction sometimes, but you know, whatever floats your boat. That's what I feel like. You should write whatever you like.
Have you ever regretted not putting certain words in any of your books?
What do you mean, like taking out the word was? Or
like adding like words that would fit more of the description into the book?
Oh, I'm constantly revising. Constantly.
Well, you said just last time you would go back and you say, oh, why didn't I take care of it?
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I haven't read this book since it came out. I will go back in to double check, like, how did I spell that name? Is there an accent at this place or at that place? I'll cross-check it for reference, but I don't want to look at it again because it's done. I have written it, and if I start looking at it, I'll want to rewrite it again because I will fidget with a book until it would never get published. And there does come a time when you have to step away from it and go, that's how I wrote it, done, I've moved on.
When you do revise, which setting do you find to be like most impactful? Like, are you like at a desk and you're like red inking it, or are you like in a coffee shop just like circling words, like thinking about it? Like, how do you revise?
I sit in front of my computer and I will frequently read out loud to myself and there are actually programs that you can get that will read your stuff to you. And if you can stand the robotic voice, it will help you hear things that your eye sometimes misses. And sometimes it's just typos. And sometimes for me, I'm really bad at echoes in writing, that particularly for adjectives and adverbs, I might use the word lovely earlier in the graph and then use lovely again 3 sentences later. Well, you want to avoid that. There are lots of synonyms for lovely. So you need to change it up. And that'll help me find that faster, reading it out loud. But yeah, I have friends that will print out the whole thing and sit with a red pen and do that. But I tend to edit as I go. I don't like spew words and just let them fly. I will write something, then I'll go back and tweak it, then I'll go back and tweak it, then I'll go back and tweak it, and then I'll move forward. And a lot of times if I'm being really regular, I will sit down at the computer, open the document, read what I wrote the day before, tweak it, and then start writing again, because that kind of gets the wheels greased and gets me going. But yeah, that's how I work. But everybody's got what works differently for them, and whatever works, works. Yes?
Do you think your journalism degree is helpful when you're writing your
Hugely helpful, because the one thing you get taught over and over in journalism is to shorten it up. Nobody wants you to make it longer. They want you to shorten it up. They want you to be concise. They want you to be terse. And you have to be as impactful in those few words as you possibly can. That's one of the things that appealed to me about Twitter. When it first came out back in the day, is that in the original Twitter, you had 140 characters to say what you needed to say, and it forces you to be really crisp and really concise. So I think journalism has been a huge help for me on that. I do go on. I tend to write long, but then I'll go back and be pretty heartless when I start editing stuff. And I'm like, oh no, that doesn't work. That doesn't work. That was a shorter way to say this. So yeah, that really, really helped. And I was a better editor than I was a journalist. So that's helped self-edit me. Yes.
So, the amount of detail that goes into books is like a lot. So like, honestly, like I've been trying to start one. I probably started like 9 times, and like I just have trouble getting the detail in. Like, how do you do that? Like,
Sometimes you just have to move forward. You have to go, all right, I'm going to come back to this later and look at it with fresh eyes, and I'm going to move forward. And that's one of the issues I'm having with the 5th book right now. Is that it's like I keep restarting it
yes.
and restarting it. It's like I know I know the best way to start it now. I've made that decision. And unfortunately, because there's a 10-year passage of time between the end of the 4th book and the beginning of the 5th book, there's a lot of exposition that has to go in there where I have to orient the reader again, orient myself again. And it's figuring out how much is enough, where I'm not explaining to them, I'm just orienting them in the world and then moving into the story.
Because it's like you don't want to bore them with the details. At the same time, you want them to know like what's happening. And I feel like it's really hard to find that balance.
It is, and as you keep on writing, as you keep on writing, you'll get better at that. You'll get better at recognizing what needs to happen. So it's just something that comes with time and practice. Yes, you had a question.
Does writing energize you more or exhaust you more?
Yes. Both. There are times when I get so jazzed when I'm writing. I almost feel like I get into this weird sort of altered state. And I'll look up and it will be hours after I started writing. And I miss that. I haven't been in that kind of writing zone in a long time. And it's such a glorious feeling. You feel like you could sprout wings and fly. And the opposite has happened too, where it's just like, you sit in front of the computer for an hour and you write 10 words, and I'm not kidding. And they're 10 crappy words. And you just have to go, okay, that was 10 crappy words for today, that's my output, and you move on. So, yes?
Could you talked about editors and writers and how you had an editor but also feedback from other people. Could you talk about the value of that in writing?
Hugely valuable when you are ready for it, and I emphasize that, when you're ready for it, to get other eyes on your work. And I'm not talking just like giving it to your teacher or having your mom read it. I'm talking about people that know what they're doing, that have enough taste to be able to tell you if you're in the right spot and aren't going to just validate you. Because validation is useless if you want to grow. You don't want people to just say, yeah, swell, best thing I ever read, if they don't mean it. If they mean it, that's great, but, and even like your mom will probably tell you that, best thing I ever read. It's not to denigrate your mother, but that isn't always necessarily the kind of feedback you need. So if any of you are seriously serious about getting some feedback from completely impartial people, I recommend absolutewrite.com. There is a huge forum there. I mean, and I do mean huge, with a lot of people who are in the business, who are trying to get into the business, who've retired from the business. There are editors, there are agents, there are publishers, there are boatloads of other authors, and we all need feedback sometimes. I have given feedback at Absolute Right, and I have taken feedback at Absolute Right. But you go on there, you have to have at least 50 posts. You have to join it with an email address, but that's it. And after 50 posts, you can start a thread in the Share Your Work system and share a substantive portion of your writing and get feedback on it from impartial people who may actually know what they're talking about. Until you have the 50 posts, there's games that you can play. Post your first 3 sentences and see if you hook me. Post your first 200 words, see if you hook me, that kind of thing. But it's a great place to go if you genuinely want to get criticism, not validation, because people will tell you what they think. So make certain that you have your big girl and big boy panties on before you go in there. Reading? Do you want me to read?
A little bit for them, just so.
I don't know, how many people actually got to read the excerpt? Mostly, all right. Just as a change of pace. That was from the beginning of the first book. I'm going to read what?
Oh, I'm just wondering, in your opinion, do you think a big ego helps an author?
A big ego? I wouldn't say a big ego, I'd say a tough ego. You have to, yes, we all think that when someone red pens our writing that it's bleeding. It isn't. And there are going to be people that will give you feedback that is not useful to you. You have to look at it and weigh it analytically and as cold-bloodedly as you can. Step away from it. I mean, whenever I get a crit, I have to read it, get over that, well, what do you mean by that? What do you mean it's not perfect? And get distance, literally shut down my computer and walk away from it for 24 hours. And then I usually think about it and go, oh, you know what, they were right. Or, you know what, they're right but not in this instance. Or, you know what, they were wrong. But you get to process it.
What is your process for like brainstorming and outlining your writing?
It's a lot of, I do a lot of my brainstorming in the car. Back when I used to take the subway to go to work, it was a lot of work that I did there. But for some reason, driving a car for me, because I'm doing that kind of mechanical thing about driving, my mind is floating free. And I'm seeing other things, you know, that I'm processing information the whole time. I'm processing where I am and where I'm heading and what the landscape is like and what do I see on the way. And that kind of opens everything up. So I just like, that's where I do it. It works differently for different people. I think a lot of people brainstorm in bed. You know, they lay in bed and in the morning before they get up and they think about their characters, which is why I think so many new authors write waking up openings. Because, you know, you think about, I'm getting up and going on with my day. They're not always the best way to open a story because they tend to take, A, a lot of time to get people on their feet and moving if you're waking them up, and B, it's an excuse to info dump, to give backstory that we don't necessarily want right at the front of the story. You can save that stuff for later. Get the story, get the wheels moving, and then you can filter in the backstory that you need later. Yes?
So brainstorming and pre-writing is more than just a physical exercise of writing. It's actually a thinking process.
Yeah,
it's a cognitive thing too.
I spend a lot of time, my husband's like, why aren't you writing? It's because I'm thinking about it. Honest to God, I'm not procrastinating, I'm thinking about it. I am thinking about, all right, if I do this and do that. A lot of people think at the computer. They'll think and they'll spew it out. That's not how I work. I have to have it pretty well assembled before I sit down to write. And then I get the crunchy, gooey enjoyment of writing the actual words, which I love.
I actually have 2 questions.
Sure.
As you're going through daily life, grocery shopping, driving, doing things, is there an extent to which this goes on in the back of your head and processes
It's
without you?
constant. It's
All the
constant,
time.
Constant. Pretty much, I always have Kristan Jametta telling me my story. You know, this is what could happen next, or this could happen next. It's always going on. There's a little portion of my brain that's always thinking about that. And sometimes I can silence that for a while if I need to do other things, but by and large, it's always going.
And my second question, when you revise, when you sit down, in the absence of specific feedback from others, when it's just you and your manuscript, how do you decide what stays and what goes?
That comes down to taste again. You know, that if I have written something and I reread it, I will generally know if it's crap or not. I mean, let's be forthright about it. I rarely write anything and go, ooh, that's the best thing ever. I usually can find ways that it can be improved, which is why I have to get to a point where I go, all right, I'm done with this, and step away from it.
Do you ever cut things you love?
Oh, absolutely. I find ways to use them again, though. I wrote a scene in one of the early drafts of Kinglet, the first book, where the main character's father is standing up on the battlements of his castle, and admiring the scenery in front of him. That, and he throws out his arms just because he loves his country so much, and it's beautiful. And then somebody comes up and says, "Oh, you're making love to your kingdom again." It didn't move the plot forward. It was a nice moment with that character, but it didn't move the plot forward. And I thought, I really need to scotch this entire opening where we are introduced to this character. It's not moving things along briskly enough. So I cut it. There's an old saying in writing, you must kill your darlings sometimes. It doesn't matter how well written something is. If it's not serving the piece as a whole, you have to be pretty heartless. However, having said that, I found a place where I could use that image for my main character to do this on the battlement of a castle in a slightly different context that was much better. It was like the original scene was like practice for when it was actually going to work and be effective. So I was really happy that I went ahead and cut it. Yeah.
Are any of your characters in your book based off of like real people?
There are elements of people that I know. There is no one character that is an artistic rendition of somebody that I know. I have named characters after my nieces and nephews, just for fun. And that's usually not straight up their name, it's a variation on it. The scene, for those of you that read the excerpt, the two old ladies in the beginning came from a photo of my mother and her younger sister pointing at the ground. Those characters are not based on my mother and my aunt. But that imagery of them pointing at the ground comes from this photograph that I had of the two of them. To this day, I don't know what they were pointing at. But I stumbled across it when I was working on it. And there's just this image of these two white-haired ladies, one's little, one's big, doing this. And I thought, oh, that's useful. So it's not Margie and Julia. It's these other two unnamed old ladies that show up. Somebody had a question over here. Was it you?
I did. Have you ever had to sacrifice a character for the sake of the story?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Not so much lately. Well, I take that back. I had introduced, when I was drafting Rages, the fourth book, I had introduced the daughter-in-law of a rival king. And in order to make his way across this rival king's kingdom, my main character was going to have to kidnap this woman and bring her across. And I thought, no. Once again, this is slowing down the narrative. The thing that has to happen is he has to get from here to here in the most expedient way possible. If I introduce a new character, I've got to introduce her, I've got to give her a little background, we have to take this trip, I have to know how she's feeling about her situation. No. So out she went, and it was better for it. I needed to make the scene work with the people that I had. So, yes.
Out as in killed her off, or out as in...
Out as she no longer exists. She's wiped. She may show up in a different form later on. Because you should always hang on to sort of ideas like that, like the idea of the person on the battlements. There's always some place it can be used. It's like trunk songs for composers. It might not work for that show, but it might work for something else later, so you stow it away. And I stow away stuff all the time. I usually have multiple drafts of a work at once. And I'll have cut scenes, and it'll go in the cut scenes file. I'll have like my NaNoWriMo version of it, and then I'll have like the final draft, and then I'll have the final draft, and then the final draft. And usually the final draft that has a date and a year on it, a month and a year, that's the final, until it gets to my editor at the publisher, and then there's yet another final draft. Are we about that time?
Could we do a little reading for them from?
If you like.
Yeah.
Unless anybody has more questions. All right, for those of you that read the excerpt, this is from the third book. It takes place, the scene is the exact same place where the excerpt from the first book is. It's just this, and with a lot of the same players, but the circumstances are really different. The reaping stretched toward the horizon, splintering the frozen earth, pointing at the sunrise like an accusing finger. Kristan Jametta stood over it, sick with the desire to stamp on it, shriek at it, piss on it, claw his fingers into it, find its heart, and tear it out. He did none of those things. Instead, he stared into the distance, one gloved hand on Malvo's bridle and the other beneath his fur-lined cloak, clutching the Jametta stone at his chest. Control, 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 he told himself, as he had 1,000 times before, for 1,000 different reasons. Breathe. Count your breaths. The churning nausea receded, leaving him lightheaded. Malvo let out a rumbling sigh, but Kristen only shut his eyes against the bitter wind and waited for the strength to face another day. He did not know how long he had been standing in numb silence when a sense of being watched crept over him. He opened his eyes. A dozen paces away stood an old woman, heavy and stolid, swaddled in a blanket and wincing in the frosty air. Beside her was a tabby cat. Kristan blinked and looked again. A wavering, transparent haze surrounded the cat, as if the little creature was somehow radiating intense heat. Wick, he thought, and tensed. By the stone, what sort of trickery is this? A cold morning for standing afield, the old woman said. Kristan nodded. The cat took a few steps toward him, angling to his left. Now that the morning sun was no longer behind it, the flickering blur had a distinctly human shape, small, slight, and somehow feminine. Pay her no mind, the old woman said. Curious creature, but she means no harm. A blast of wind made them all flinch. Malvo shuddered and stamped. Cat and shape skittered backward in perfect unison. Are you of the castle? The old woman asked. Are you of the castle? Bright fragments jangled in the ruins of Kristan's memory. A spring morning, the smell of fields freshly green, the ring of tack, and the thunder of Malvo's hooves. Beneath those shining shards, other more ominous memories shifted, and Kristan twitched his attention back to the pair before him. Can you not speak, sir? The old woman asked. I can speak. Kristan jerked his chin at the cat thing. Is she yours? The old woman chuckled, as much as such creatures can be. The cat moved toward him again with much more confidence. It lifted a paw as if to pat at his leg, just as the shape spouted a froggy protrusion that reached toward his cloak. He recoiled and bumped against Malvo. Never fear, the old woman said. Such a little cat can do you no harm. Kristan snorted. Does she speak? Both the cat and the woman froze, but then the old one chuckled again, although this time the laugh sounded forced. Speak? That would be strange indeed. Why, is she a simpleton? With a loud hiss, the cat disappeared, snuffed like a candle's flame. In the same breath, the shape solidified into an adolescent girl. She stumbled backward and fell, and the old woman leaped in front of her, arms outflung as if to ward off a blow. When Kristan did not move, the woman slowly relaxed. You saw her, she whispered. I saw her. Who is she, your granddaughter? My great-niece, daughter of my sister's daughter. The old woman brought one hand from beneath her blanket and rubbed her face as if dazed. On her wrist was a bead-studded bracelet of braided leather thongs, and on the back of her hand were strange tattoos. From the rubble of Kristan's mind's eye, more fragments rose. The smoky smell of a little campfire, feet squelching in wet boots, a bent and wrinkled woman offering him a tattered blanket to dry himself. In an instant they were gone, obliterated by more powerful memories, shadowy, gore-splattered, horrifying. Panic and rage twisted Kristan's guts. Control, 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 he told himself. He took a deep breath and brought all his senses to bear on the woman before him. We've met before. No, said the old woman. You were here with your horse on this very field nearly 3 years ago. You frightened my horse. I fell in the lake. He pointed to the ground. You showed me this wreathing. You told me it was an omen. And now you come back and try to dupe me with your wick tricks. And I think we've arrived at the witching hour, haven't we?
Well, they're here until 2:30, but you've been at this a long
Oh,
time.
2:30. Good Lord,
Yes.
people. I keep forgetting how long a school day is. You know, it's long.
So, but you are under no obligation.
No, that's fine. Are there any more questions? I thought we were done at 2 for some silly reason. Yeah.
How did you get the inspiration for your book? Did it come from previous experiences or just off the top of your head?
It was the sort of ongoing theme in the book is about the main character's need to be kind. He wants to be a decent person. He is born into a powerful family. He loses all that in the first chapter or 2 of the first book. And then it's about him trying to get back his family's stone. It's a talisman. and what he has to become in order to earn the stone back. So so yes, life experience informed a lot of it. I mean, I don't spend a lot of time running around on horses and fields and stuff, but you know, the experience of knowing people and learning how people's minds work, there's a big theme throughout it about how what we fear can make us angry and make us want to strike out. So it's about learning how to deal with fear properly, where you don't immediately just either run away or try to hurt someone who's scaring you. You try to figure out why they are the way they are, what's happening, that sort of thing. So yeah, it's just ongoing stuff. So there was no one thing that I can say inspired me. There certainly were books and such. No, I wish there was.
Okay, I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's asking me if there's a promo code for you guys to get a discount, but unfortunately, if it was up to me, I'd set that, but my publisher doesn't do that. It'd be nice if they did. Maybe down the road it can happen. Who knows?
Awesome.
So yeah, it's just whatever inspires a story and moves it forward. Anyone else?
I say thank you for being with us. Mr. Cole's class, thank you for being here. Guest students, thank you for your excellent behavior.
My class would like to give her our personal approval. 1, 2, 3. Hoorah!
I'm curious, show of hands, would anybody like me to encourage our librarian to invest in a set of these for our library? Got someone who'd like to read? Okay.
Yeah, and it's easy enough. I mean, it's in the libraries in Arlington County and Fairfax County where I live. So.
All right.
All right, thank you guys. You had great questions.